This is the case of Ellie Gold. On the 6th of February 2002, Eleanor Gold, or as she preferred to be called, Ellie Gold, was the daughter of Matthew and Carol Gold. She lived with her family in Caen in Wiltshire. Ellie was a Year 12 student in the 6th form at Hardwick School in Chippenham. She had been studying for her A-level examinations. Ellie worked really hard for her schooling. She always completed her homework on time and studied hard for exams. She was one of the top of her class, always getting good grades, and hoped one day to study psychology at university. Ellie was also a keen horse rider. She participated in local equestrian events, as well as competing in cross-country too. Ellie had ambitions of one day, after going to university, maybe joining the horse-mounted police. It would be a good job and she could combine her love for horses. In January 2019, Ellie was just about to turn 17 years of age. She had begun dating a boy from school. He was also studying for his A-levels. His name was Thomas Griffiths. Ellie and Thomas had known each other since they were in Year 7, when they had both joined the same high school. Thomas was Ellie's first boyfriend, and they tried to spend as much time as possible together. So much that Ellie wanted to introduce him to her family. Ellie's mother said that her husband was not overly keen on Thomas, maybe because he didn't have much to say for himself, but she assumed that maybe this was just an aspect of his character or was down to his age. He would answer yes or no, but would never keep a conversation going. It was kind of as if he didn't want to be there. As Ellie's exams approached, she realised that she was struggling to do everything and keep up with her studying. She was at school during the day, she had her hobby of horses, and then her boyfriend wanted to see her practically every night, and she just wasn't getting the time to put into her exams that she wanted to. She wanted to focus on her studies and felt that the relationship with Thomas was just not right for her anymore. She just couldn't do everything, and she had priorities. Unfortunately for Thomas, he was not one of them right now, so she ended it with him in early May. Ellie had also said that she felt suffocated by his attention. If he was not wanting to meet up with her, he was turning up at her home, phoning and texting her constantly. Ellie told her friends the night before that Thomas had really not taken the split well. The following day, on the 3rd of May 2019, Thomas Griffiths was dropped off at school by his mother, as usual. But Thomas did not want to go in. He had plans for the day that did not involve school. So after he sat outside and emailed his teachers to tell them he was feeling unwell, he walked to Chippenham's bus station, where he caught a bus back to Derry, which was where he lived. After dropping him off, Thomas's mother had also returned home, not knowing that her son was also on his way back too. So Thomas snuck into the house, hiding in a wardrobe of his bedroom so that she would not discover that he was absent from school and start asking questions. Thomas quickly waited in the wardrobe for his mother to depart the house again. He then took the keys to one of the cars on the drive, a silver Ford Focus, and drove to Ellie Gold's house. Of course, this did not go down well. Ellie had made up her mind. As much as Thomas tried to persuade her to reconsider the split, it ended in an argument, with Ellie getting upset with the situation, Thomas becoming madder that he could not get his own way, and the situation just seemed to be going round and round. Thomas could not imagine ever seeing Ellie with anyone else. The thought made him literally feel sick and filled him with rage. It was then that Thomas grabbed Ellie, attempting to restrict her breathing by compressing her neck. But that was not the end of his horrible crimes. He then used a sharp instrument he had taken from the family's kitchen block and used it to plunge it into her neck 13 times. Thomas Griffiths looked down and realised that Ellie was no longer alive as she flopped onto the floor next to him. The mess was so overwhelming and seemed to get more and more as he watched. Before spending the best part of an hour at the house attempting to try and clean up the crime scene, he had no idea what to mop it all up with, grabbing piles of clothes as rags to do this with. He retrieved a black bin bag from under the sink, which he placed all of the red-soaked clothing inside. He also took off his trainers and attempted to wash them in the sink, knowing that if he went home with them looking the way they did, it wouldn't take long before his mother started asking questions. He then cleaned up the sharp instrument using an apron before placing it in Ellie's hand, trying to make her injuries look like they were self-inflicted. He then used Ellie's finger to unlock her mobile phone, and posing as her, he went on to text her friend, who was due to give her a lift to school, telling her not to collect her. After returning home to change, Thomas put the clothing in the washing machine and then went out again and dumped the bag of items in a local woodland. As he came out of the woods, he was seen by a neighbour who stopped and offered to give him a lift back to school, which he accepted. Later that day, he was subsequently collected from school by his mother. She was under the impression that he'd been at school all day. Later that day, he sent messages to friends saying that he and Ellie were going to take a break from their relationship to see how they felt after their exams. He then sent a message to Ellie's phone asking if they could meet up. It was now 3 p.m. and Ellie's father arrived home. Walking into the kitchen, he was the first one to discover her body. Ellie's father had no idea what to think. He was so traumatized and upset. He did not know how this had happened. He called the ambulance service, who sent out paramedics and got in touch with the police. It was soon determined that this was not self-inflicted, and police now had a murder investigation on their hands. Ellie's father contacted her mother, and she rushed home. They were all devastated. Meanwhile, the house was now a crime scene. Forensics could be seen taking photographs and examining the whole area, taking samples of blood and fingerprints, while despite the family being so upset that they could barely speak, police still needed to ask questions and take statements. They needed to know who would want to harm their daughter, and the only name that they could think of was her ex-boyfriend Thomas. She had told them that she'd split from him and that he wasn't happy about it. It was determined that Ellie had been murdered mid-morning, meaning most people in her life had alibis for this time. Her parents had been at work and her friends had been at school, but according to school records, the one person that wasn't there that day was Thomas. He had reported in sick. The police spoke to Thomas's mum, and it soon became evident that she had no idea that he'd been home that day, telling police that she'd been there and he wasn't home when she was there. She had dropped him off and he had never mentioned feeling sick that day. Police spoke to Ellie's friends, and they spoke of Thomas as being controlling and overprotective, and that he'd not taken the split well. It wasn't long before Wiltshire police arrested Thomas Griffiths outside a friend's house on suspicion of murder at 6 p.m. on the 3rd of May. He was taken to Melksham police station to be held for questioning. Police seized Thomas's mobile phone, and forensic detectives were able to retrieve evidence from it, tracking him near the scene that day. CCTV cameras were checked, tracking Thomas's movements around town, from the school that morning, getting the bus home, driving the family's car in the direction of Ellie's house, and a neighbour was able to say that she'd seen someone who matched Thomas's description outside Ellie's house that morning. Thomas Griffiths also had fresh scratch marks on his neck that were consistent with defensive wounds. He initially denied any involvement in Ellie's death, claiming not to have seen her at all that day, and also saying that he had arranged to go to her house so that the pair could study together. Police then matched blood on his trainers to the blood of Ellie, placing him firmly at the crime scene. So he was charged with her murder. Thomas Griffiths was charged on the 6th of May and appeared before Salisbury Magistrates Court the following day. He then appeared at Bristol Crown Court on the 9th of May, where a provisional trial date was set for the 28th of October. He did not enter a plea and was remanded in custody. At a plea hearing on the 29th of August 2019, Thomas Griffiths pleaded guilty to Ellie Gold's murder and was remanded in custody awaiting sentence. The recorder, Peter Blair QC, also lifted reporting restrictions that prevented Griffiths' name from being out in the media outlets, describing his crime as extremely grave. Thomas Griffiths' sentencing took place on the 8th of November, where Richard Smith QC spoke for the prosecution and Sasha Was QC represented the defence. The court was told that Griffiths had argued with Ellie Gold prior to her death, and that post-mortem showed pressure to the neck that had incapacitated her. There was evidence to suggest after the murder he had then placed the knife in her hand in an attempt to make it appear as though it was self-inflicted injuries. It was also said that Thomas Griffiths claimed to not remember the events of what happened. A letter written by Thomas Griffiths to the court was read out, in which he expressed heartfelt remorse for his actions. "I am so sorry. I know my apologies and explanations will never be enough," he said, "but I hope in time I can show how truly sorry I am." He also claimed his mental health was not good at the time of the murder. Sentencing Griffiths, Judge Mr. Justice Garnham described his actions as a frenzied attack and the most appalling act on a young woman in her own home, where she should have been safe. "The effects of your actions have not only snuffed out the life of a young talented girl, but loaded pain onto her friends and family." It was ruled that the murder was not premeditated because Thomas Griffiths did not take the weapon with him. Thomas was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12.5 years before he is eligible for parole because of his age. The law prevented him from receiving a whole life tariff. Ellie's funeral was held on the 29th of May at St Mary's Church in Caen. The service was attended by family and friends. Following Thomas Griffiths' sentence, the case was subsequently referred to the Attorney General's office under the unduly lenient sentences scheme, but on the 6th of December 2019, it was announced that it could not be referred to the Court of Appeal because the law prevents people under 21 from being given a whole life tariff. Speaking about the decision, Carol Gold, Ellie's mother, described the legal process as a crazy system, where those under the age of 18 had the same starting point as younger children. "There's a huge difference between a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old, she said. "The law needs to be changed." Ellie's friends began a campaign to have compulsory self-defense classes taught in schools, feeling that basic knowledge of self-defense would have saved her life and that it should be taught alongside subjects like swimming and road safety. The campaign was backed by James Gray, the MP for North Wiltshire. The matter was debated in the House of Commons. Vicky Ford, a junior minister with the Department of Education, ruled out self-defense lessons compulsory for schools, but agreed to issue guidelines and ask head teachers if they felt self-defense classes were right for their schools, and said the balance of risk was much clearer with things such as swimming and road safety, but that teaching self-defense relied very much on age and maturity of pupils, and that their understanding that it could only be used in emergencies. Carol Gold, Ellie's mother, subsequently campaigned for the introduction of Ellie's Law that would enable young offenders to be treated more like adults when convicted of serious crimes such as murder. The family and friends of Ellie Gold will never get over her death, and Thomas Griffiths remains in custody.